All right, this is a regular meeting of the Norwich Planning Commission. We are going to jump right into the agenda. And if people have that in front of them, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda and then we can.
Motion to approve.
Jeff,
Second.
all right, moved and seconded. Any conversation about the agenda? Okay, hearing none, I'm gonna just call any opposition to the agenda moving forward. Do we have a consensus on moving with that? All right. All right, we are going forward. Public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we have anybody that wants to speak? I do not have anyone in Zoom land right now.
Jan, if I think that I'd like to have a comment down in land use down when we get down there, is that okay? Or do I need, I mean, I may not say anything, but do I need to tell you now if I'm going to?
No, any item on the agenda will have opportunity for public comment at the time. So you'll have time to do it at that agenda item. Okay. Then let's move to correspondence. The only correspondence in the packet is a letter from Paul Manganello about the bicycle corridor survey. I will mention that in the chair notes. So we'll talk to that in a minute. I don't believe there are any other correspondence comments. Other things will be dealt with in the packet, in the other agenda items. But Jeff?
Stu was first with his hand.
Okay. I was looking the
So
other way
I'd
too.
Okay, I'd like to support what Paul has written, and also voice a concern with how that's going to play out. The last time Route 5 was approved, there were a number of people, including myself, who wrote to the Vermont Public Highway people, and our comments were ignored. What they ended up doing was putting the guardrails too close to the road itself, and they narrowed the shoulder, which made it obviously less safe for cyclists and pedestrians and whoever. So I raise that as a concern, and also as something to watch out for, that the responsiveness of those people who should be responsive is problematic, and watch out for it if you want to support this.
Yeah. Okay. Jeff? Jeff? Yeah.
Sorry. So a couple things. So the town under the select board had a bike pedestrian committee, which I was a part of, with Lucy Gibson chairing. And for reasons unbeknownst to me, disbanded the committee. But a part of the committee's role was to look at connectivity between communities regionally, et cetera, which ultimately included a planning grant for a shared use path from Hartford to Norwich, which the Planning Commission endorsed, and which the town manager and staff at the time canceled without any input from others, let's just say. So I think sitting here today, trying not to look back and at some of the conduct of past leaders in quotes, but I think it's critical to consider connectivity between Hartford and Norwich and Thetford and Norwich and Hanover and Norwich and Stratford, adjacent communities in the context of multimodal facilities. And I'm hopeful that this might be resurrected.
Amen.
Yeah. Okay.
Jan?
Lisa's raising her hand. Lisa.
Let's just go ahead and talk about the bike corridor for a minute here. We can do it here or in chair notes, but it's, as far as I know, and then I'll open it up again. It is VTrans has a plan that ends with a report in January and backs up to survey input in October, early November, and then they roll it up and present it in January. And that's about as much as I know, other than a few what was in that letter and other things. Jeff, just background?
Yeah, Jan, there are planning grants that remain available for this kind of effort to the extent Norwich cares about the multimodal connection to the town of Hartford, hypothetically. And I just want to note that Elisa Close raised her hand and would like to comment.
Yep. Yes, go ahead, Elisa.
Thanks. This may actually be something that you can help me out with. When you said that you've been on a group that dealt with this before, my question, Jan, pertains to how we determine what gets taken out of the path that becomes the bike way. I like the idea of multimodal, I like the idea of bike path, but you may also remember just about the time we moved here, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, there was discussion about a sidewalk on Route 5 coming up from like Willing Hands up to the elementary school. And my brother and sister-in-law, Stuart Close and Kristen Brown, live in a house with I'm told it's the largest surviving elm tree, one of the largest surviving ones in Vermont, on their lawn. And it was part of the discussion that I attended. There was some concern about the sidewalk undermining the root system and killing the tree. Ultimately, that was tabled. I don't think it was ever decided. And so when I hear something like this, while I'm in favor of it, I definitely have thoughts about those of us that can't run away or move somewhere else, like the elm tree. And so I'm interested to know how whether that's, I'm way off on a tangent and it has no relevance, or whether that might possibly be a part of what this encompasses.
It's definitely not on a tangent. I mean, it is relevant. I'm not sure specifically how deep they're going to go on this survey. My sense is that it was at the bare minimum. How much interest is there, or is there consistent interest up and down the corridor as a starting point? I don't know. Jeff, do you have more background?
Yeah, way too much, John. So while Elisa may be off topic a bit, the planning grant was from Church Street to essentially Marion Cross School. And one abutter, not her brother or sister-in-law, opposed the planning grant because there was a drainage question. And the select board basically said, we're not going to accept the grant. The town decided to pay the funds that were spent on the planning grant. And that was that. Personally, along with my firm, we provided volunteer effort for Stu and his family to look at how to preserve the elm tree. So the elm tree wasn't ultimately the issue. In the context of Route 5, it's a major corridor for a variety of reasons. And there are public funds available for planning considerations that, so I don't want to delve too deeply, but there may be some limited issues along the corridor, but a shared use path proximate to Route 5, from my perspective, is not that big a deal.
Okay, so do you know of anything, Vince, go ahead.
We can continue if you were going to answer, or mine was somewhat separate. So you can address what Jeff said.
I'm just asking whether we need to do anything special to prepare for this survey question, or is it just going to show up in a few weeks in our inbox, and we will then bring it in front of us and answer it as it's asked, or whether there are more layers to this we should worry about?
Yeah, Jan, I'm advocating for the Planning Commission to turn around what staff and town managers in the past have done to seek, VTrans assistance to pursue a shared use path that connects us to Hartford and more broadly, the region.
So is it such that you could you know, that would be a section of this corridor would be, you know, it may not be right along Route 5. It may be in another place that works best for that connection, but that would count as part of this corridor.
All of the above. I mean, the Route 5 connection from Norwich to Hartford is a critical multimodal connection for our region.
Okay. Let Vince, then Chris.
Oh, that was it. That was what I was going to say. It's like, how do we, if this is a survey gauging interest, it seems like we're very interested. So how do we demonstrate that towards, to
Yeah.
VTrans?
Yeah. Okay. I agree. Chris?
So I got the impression that they had included the planning commission, but it seems to me that this is sort of, he also addressed it to the select board. So is this really a select board initiative who will say the planning commission should take it on? Or I didn't get if it was really a planning commission objective first, or if it was really the select board who's doing this. And my second question is maybe to Jeff, since you were on a committee like this. According to that letter, VTrans is clearly, you know, voicing their objections to the idea, and that's how it got switched over to a survey. Besides plowing nightmare, and because it's a state highway, so that they have to do all the plowing and maintenance of it. And I'm not quite sure, and again, I'm probably way ahead of the game, but do you know why VTrans is objecting to it? That was to Jeff. If you guys,
Go ahead, Jeff, if you can answer that.
So Chris asked a number of things. So to the extent this is a select board issue, if the select board is outside of executive session, I'm sorry, I did that. I apologize. To the extent the select board, thanks, Chris, for laughing. I appreciate it. To the extent the select board wants to do this the right way, they would collectively defer to the planning commission to pursue this. There's a long history of the planning commission looking at multimodal facilities, planning and planning grants. And to that extent, we should pursue that. If VTrans is expressing concerns about that, the big issue from the Hartford multimodal connection up to the school was some poor planning, some ledge, some other stuff, et cetera. So if VTrans has a concern about maintaining facilities like they had along, our entrance where the town took over maintenance, et cetera, that could be a topic of discussion. So to the extent VTrans has a concern, I'm not aware of it having been properly and appropriately expressed.
no, I'm not, sorry, Jeff. I'm not talking about, Paul mentioned that it sounded like on the state level that when, I forgot the author of the bill who put this forward, that it said in Manginelli's letter that VTrans objected to the whole idea of this Massachusetts to Vermont connection, and VTrans was against it. That's what I was wondering, more on a state level, because this is a huge amount of, I don't see it just being a Norwich, Hartford, Thetford thing. It looks like this whole VTrans survey is going to be a corridor, two states, Massachusetts, Vermont. So that's a huge coordinating effort.
Let's focus on Norwich is my point. There's a lot of
Yeah.
opportunity here, and I refer to Stu, who's raised his hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Stu, and then I do want to, we can button this up, and if somebody can volunteer to look into the next step, because I agree with Jeff. The planning commission is clearly front and center of transportation planning, and that's what this is. So I don't want to lose that fact and that leadership. But I don't know what the timing is of the next step and how best to get involved. Go ahead, Stu.
I want to support both what you just said and also what Jeff said as far as trying to connect different communities. As a cyclist, I'm really aware of the need to widen the shoulders when you start to leave Norwich and you go toward Hartford. It really is, it's important. And you can't have a very safe commute or pleasure cycle or whatever cycle you want to do without having better shoulders. The start of the shoulder is fine, but when you get past Hobson Road, it deteriorates significantly. So that
Okay,
just one point on the whole issue.
yeah. Jeff?
Yeah, and I volunteer to reach out to V-Trans.
All right,
Uh,
thank you, Jeff.
with the caveat that you harass me.
I will, I promise. All right, and then, yeah, so Vince, put that in the minutes that I'm allowed to harass him. Expected to harass him.
Okay, I'll make sure that's documented.
Okay, so that's correspondence, but it's also a piece that was in the chair notes. So let me jump into the other stuff in the chair notes. I had a conversation with Jeff Lubell, update on the planning grant for the New Boston Road project. They're backing up from a January deadline for the next possible time to submit that. They would like to show a draft to the planning commission before they go back to the select board. What we settled on was if we do our next planning commission meeting on November 7th, which is 4 weeks from tonight, it's the first Tuesday instead of the second Tuesday, but it's 4 weeks from tonight. Then that gives them November after that to go to the select board and try and do things in the right order. So they're working on that with Two Rivers' help, and I think they're going fine in terms of drafting it. So that's just a informational update. We'll see that again for real at the next meeting. Then apropos of the bike corridor, we had actually Vince had a question, and somebody else did it too, about Article 10. Oh, Peter Orner did at the select board meeting. We have Article 10 that passed in March, saying allocating 50K for long-range planning of sidewalks, bikeways, trails, and for some people that Beaver Meadow is the highlight. But the question is really, it doesn't seem to be moving. What does the planning commission, if anything, want to do about that? Do we want to jump up and down? Do we want to say we'll push it? How do we want to be involved in that topic? Jeff?
Yeah, so let's we can discuss that either as a planning commission or a subcommittee. Given the volunteer efforts that I've had to make significant process until staff quashed it in the past, there's no need to allocate money to the issue. I know well the Beaver Meadow issue. I don't see the need to spend any more unnecessary money in this community.
So if we strip the money from the conversation for a minute and say, does the planning commission want to take on the element in the short term, in the next several months, the topic of sidewalks, bikeways, trails, that element of transportation, pulled by the town in as Article 10 asked for, with or without money? Do we want to put that relatively high on our priority list?
Yeah, hey, Jan, I'd be glad to be a member of that subcommittee.
And
In
is
fact,
that
I'll
something?
share that.
Okay, all right, thank you, Jeff. Could we roll in bike corridor and connection to neighboring towns, multimodal, that it seems like an absolute natural combination? Okay.
Yes.
Very good. So I have a seed crystal of an interested group. Do I have any other hands leaping up to join Jeff in that activity?
He's trying to get the camera here.
Vince,
I'll
I
volunteer.
saw Vince's hand come in from the side. Thank you, Vince. All right. And you know, anybody else, we can also reach out and get, you know, clearly we have townspeople that are interested. We have somebody that wrote a letter to us about the bike corridor. We have, people interested in various pieces of this. Do we need more than 2 PC members? Jeff?
Yeah, Jan, if you put me on this committee, I'm gonna reach out to a bunch of folks and then we're gonna populate and overpopulate.
Okay, so let's have we'll come back to this a little bit on committee process that's on our agenda later, but how does the PC feel, the whole planning commission feel a subcommittee should be empowered to add members? So if Jeff and Vince go off and say, all right, we're giving out tickets to our party, you can come be on our subcommittee, is that okay with this whole group, or do you want it to come back for blessing to the whole PC?
I think they should go ahead and get public participation.
Okay,
Hey,
Other
Jan,
yeah, Jeff?
yeah, procedurally, if they're gonna join the subcommittee, it has to be blessed by the planning commission. But that does not preclude us from reaching out and sending tickets to the world.
Right.
That's a different
And
issue.
that's right, and that is somewhat what we're doing in the solar sighting subcommittee is giving tickets out for free at Danowitz and hoping people show up. So I think that's fine. But if you have more formal, if you say, okay, we want to have X number more formal members, then we would expect it to come back to the whole group. Okay, Chris?
Just from the formalities, I think we talked about this, Jan, in at least for the solar sighting, is that we're not voting on anything. So it's informal that way. So it doesn't matter if there are only 2 planning commission members, right? They could just be the 2 of them running the meeting and inviting people. Isn't that what we ultimately decided?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we got in the solar sighting subcommittee. I think the only thing to remind people is that we are bending over backwards to be open meeting law compliant, which means those 2 members should play by the rules, which is we don't want, you know, even if we have 3-4 active subcommittees, they each need to warn their meetings and do the minutes. Those 2 PC members are enough to activate open meeting law. That's the formality I think that's most important. Jeff?
at least.
Yeah, I'm cheating because I saw Vince raise his hand, so I'm not worried about any of the above.
Vince? Oh, because you got another.
No, Vince is an expert at all this. I'm just gonna sit back and
Fabulous note taker.
I say,
That
yeah,
helps.
it's true. We got minutes nailed.
I'm cheating.
Stuart?
I'd just like to suggest that there be at least 3 on the committee, so that if there's any difference of opinion, there can be a vote taken and whatever it is can be decided. And it doesn't need necessarily, I don't think, need to be somebody from the planning commission. It could be somebody from the public that gets appointed by the planning commission.
Okay. I don't disagree. We don't necessarily need to decide it tonight. If you come back and say we've got somebody gung ho to be a 3rd member or whatever, then we can appoint them. Jeff?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, Jan, if, we could ask, we could theoretically appoint Peter and Paul, huh?
How about
I've
Mary?
heard those names before.
Yeah.
Peter Warner or Paul Manganello. I mean, I
Yeah.
serve on the Affordable Housing Subcommittee with Paul. I mean, we could propose to appoint one or both and
Right,
a yes or no.
right.
And do I need to make a motion?
To form a subcommittee?
Yeah, if we're gonna do the subcommittee tonight, if that's what the
Yeah.
planning commission wants to do, might I say, and Jeff G proposes to appoint Peter and Paul. And the rest of the apostles.
Certainly reach that the planning commission empowers you to reach out to them and offer them membership if they are so willing. Stuart's starting to twitch because it might be an even number, but I think chances are you'll get one or the other that says yes, and we can deal with it if we want to go from 4 to 5 to if we need to. But I would certainly take a motion to create the subcommittee and empower asking a couple town members to join.
So moved.
Second,
All right. All those in favor, Stoller, aye. All right, thank you. All right, so that was the article. We're rolling Article 10, the Route 5 bike corridor and all that stuff into a bundle and shoving it over to that subcommittee. So great, thank you.
Vince has his hand up.
Okay, Vince, go ahead.
I agree with Jeff that this isn't going to cost any money, and I know, but it's kind of two separate issues, and that there was kind of a weird compromise that the select board smashed them into one article. There's still that article that was passed by the people. Is that even something that people can really do? Like, we didn't like. Can people just vote money towards, like, is there money that exists? I'm just kind of trying to figure out.
I don't understand the details, but I think the point is, yeah, you can't spend money without the select board. So it may be a two-step process where the town has made it apparent they want to spend the money, but I would ask that we give it to the subcommittee. The subcommittee should be reaching out, including the select board in the conversation, and roll in the fact that if there's something, if we say, hey, we can do a planning grant, or we can do a thus and such, that needs money, then put that on the table. And the town has said they would support that. Talk to the select board about it, but I don't think we need to know right now the nuances of what our budget is or if we need it.
Okay. That sounds good. Yeah, the planning comes first.
Yeah, let's see what we need. Yeah. Okay. An update on the document requests, and it brings up a couple interesting issues. Actually some positive stuff. So the two things that Jeff officially asked for at the last meeting were the zoning bylaws edit work in progress documents, and any graphics, any original files relative to the town plan. The town plan one I will take off the table because that is in Brandon's hands. Stuart actually brought it up again in the select board meeting and made it clear what we want is the original file from the town plan and the graphics. And Brendan said he was looking for it, and that's what I got from him. I'm not pushing on Pam. That is in Brennan's camp to come back and report to us. On the zoning edits and works in progress, I do have quite a bit of stuff to look at. I just got another 10 documents from Pam. I looked at that table of contents we created. I pointed out 5 or 6 things. She sent them over to me. I did it again. So I have what is probably 15 documents now that are in the 2018 to 2020 range of rewrites of chapters, table of contents of the whole thing, edited documents. So my question then is to take that and put it into kind of a process question. If we have documents like that we want to make available to certainly the PC and the wider group, should we put them in a packet. And it may be a packet, it may be not connected to a specific agenda item, but we need to get it into the funnel, get it onto the sort of public record. Here are these 10 documents, and then we may pull from them for later agenda items. So that's one topic related to that, and then I'll open it up. Pam also sent me today, after I was talking to her about this, she said, well, we had a section of the website that we used for the town plan activities in 2019-20. There was a whole section of the website linked from our planning department that had this document, this edit, the town survey results, the maps and things. And the link to get to that section of the website was taken down when the town plan was adopted, but none of the content was taken off. So she sent me the front door key again, the link, and it's all still there, and it's 15 or 20 other links to documents and things. And so it's the same topic. I would like, we talked about that. We'd like to have a place on the website where we could build a reference library that would be available. And so I would like us to explore that, and then take the 15 new documents I've got. Maybe they need to feed in through a packet, but then get them in a place where they can be seen. So that's a very long description about where we're doing with documents, but I think it's positive, and it's something we can build on. Jeff?
Yeah, so Jan, I'm going to build on your positive outlook, and to the extent those documents are available, I'd like to ask us to engage a digital nerd like Pete Fellows to sift through those documents. I mean, I'm a digital dinosaur. So if we have to pay Two Rivers, for Pete to do that, let's get somebody that understands the maps. I mean, Pete is a wonderful expert in what we're really after is the maps, and then the core document. So I'd like to ask us to flip it to Two Rivers, whatever protocols are necessary to do that, to have Pete say, yep, we got it. We now have the documents that were created by the town.
Okay. Anybody else? Do people, I mean, I'm willing to look, what I'd like to ask a question of whatever legal experts, and that may actually be in Two Rivers as well, but, or VCLT maybe, to ask the question of, if we have reference documents, they could be totally not coming from the town. They could be other town plans, other state regulations or something, and we want to get them onto a working location, not a place where we're editing things in real time, but a working reference library. Do they need to come through a packet to get on there? It's a pretty specific kind of open meeting law question, and I'm certainly willing to find the right person to answer that for us. Chris?
So, just so I understand, these were all documents in Rod's or in the planning commission office already?
The ones that I'm talking about specifically that I just got from Pam, yes. Or I would expect the ones that are on the website that were that were some of the stuff worked on for the town plan, both were pre-existing town documents, yes.
So my understanding is that any document created by a town official is a public document. So I'm not quite sure why they would have to be sifted through the planning commission. So I know that Lily created on the planning commission page a list of documents. Oh, she started a list. So it seems to me that like I said, unless these documents came to you via Pam or via Brennan, who gave them?
This was Pam, and it's coming out of the planning files. I mean,
Right, so they're all
hard
public
drive
documents.
planning files, yes.
So they're all public documents already.
Okay.
So if you're looking for something like that, it seems that if you think of putting them either individually, list them individually, so that any one of us, if we need to reference them, can now go to that, the planning commission page and go to them. I mean, I don't know,
Right, right.
if not for the public's sake, that they could, for you to print them and put them in our packet, the public gets to see them again, if they haven't already seen them, but
So, but I think your point is correct, that and helpful, if we take the assumption that they're public records already, we don't have to go through the packet anointing of public records stage. We are just moving them from one town file to another. We're duplicating them from one town file to another.
the only thing that is not a public record would be anything confidential information. Other than that, anything that is generated by a town, again,
Right.
minus some confidential legal, but it doesn't sound like, but I don't think Pam would have just handed that kind of
No,
stuff.
no, they wouldn't. I wouldn't be getting those. Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, to follow up on what Chris said, I mean, I think what folder do you create? Archival information discovered.
Archive, yeah.
If I took a less charitable view, stuff we thought was destroyed, we found.
Archival,
Let's cut out the heifer dust here. So there's nothing the planning commission has done that is not public, with the exception of the lunatic open meeting law excoriation of Ernie. And that's not part of this paradigm. There is nothing in the record outside of the open meeting law lunacy that was thrust on the planning commission. So put it all on this file.
Okay.
Name it as charitably or as least charitable as you want, so that everyone can have access to it.
So I think so then it's just a mechanics question, and that I can follow up with Lily and get to say, okay, it's helpful to give it a little annotations here. Here are some zoning bylaws edits, here are some, and we just populate it. All right,
Yeah.
I will take the mechanics of that, and I take that as a positive thing to get some movement on that and I just want us to be able to put things where people can see it. That the solar siting subcommittee is going to have all kinds of things coming in. We just got a 50-page scenic resource, and then you got a different one. I want a place to put them so you don't have to remember which packet they're in and so forth.
I agree, Jan, because there are so many times that I think of a document that the select board looked at, and you have to remember what year, what month, and go through all the packets, which take forever. And I love the idea of having a document folder that you can just get your hands on it. I think it's a great idea.
Okay, I will talk to Lily and Pam and just get so that we have the ways of doing that, because I'd like to be able to make it as easy as possible to pull stuff out, put it there, annotate it a little bit, and have everybody have a link. Okay, great. That's what I had on chair notes. Now let's jump in. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
So I'm not quite sure. There's something in the packet, and I forgot what it's titled, but it has all kinds of like require EV charging stations, require
That is
that document come from?
Yeah, it goes and Pam is kind enough to link our packet, index our packet. That is actually, it's down on agenda item 7 under the input from other groups on our activities. So same thing about the draft minutes from the Historic Preservation Commission, where they had, here are our top 3 priorities for town plan work. That was a document from the Energy Committee into our hopper of consideration. When you're redoing things, here's the kind of stuff the Energy Committee would like you to think about. So
So that
that's-
was from the Energy Committee.
yes.
Okay,
It
so
was, Linda actually sent it to me. She had referenced it in one of our conversations and then she sent it in.
So can I just, this is, ask the board, whatever. I've often found it really helpful, at least in other packets that I've read, that's whoever either submitted it or authored it or whatever, that, so we know, because I didn't know what it was, what the relevance was or
Yeah.
how it related to any agenda, but it's kind of nice to know. I thought it was from another town. I had no idea.
Right. So that's a very good segue, Chris, because that's the next topic on the agenda is planning commission process relating to correspondence and correspondence, and then you can expand it to packets and things like that. Because I agree. I mean, even just having the indexed packet that tells you which agenda item something relates to is valuable. But I would very much like to see, something like the Route 5 corridor letter was pretty clear. Here's who I am, here's what I'm writing about, and here's some information. But I think it's perfectly legitimate for us to ask for that, so that, I mean, I sent that thing to Pam to put in the packet. But it's acceptable, it should be expected that I would say, not just, hey, Pam, it's for this agenda item, but submitted by Linda Gray as Energy Committee input towards potential town plan changes or some bare minimum context and source. Then, then it hangs together and makes much more sense. And so I would like to take that and open that topic up, because I'd like to talk about correspondence, accepting correspondence. I'd like to talk about the land use subcommittee and not accepting correspondence and how the whole commission feels about that, and get some discussion going on that, because I think we need some guidelines about how we do correspondence and what are the rules. So I'll open the topic up and then say my piece when the time comes. Chris and then Stuart.
Well, I'm just gonna go back to what, and again, I think the packets I've always thought packets are really important. And I read the select board packets to see what kind of documents come through. I've submitted some and I put my name on it, and somehow, I don't know why, Miranda takes my name off. And I've always thought it's really important. And why I think it's important is when I read that thing from as a planning commission member, I didn't know what it was, but I figured we'd talk about it. But if a member of the public reads that, not knowing what it is, and starts seeing all these things required, you might get the public a little kind of like, oh God, what is the planning commission up to? So that's why I just think that authoring it, or who the source is, just let somebody know that they're just putting it in the packet for whatever particular reason. So I didn't mean to. You stated it well, but then it segues to sort of Stuart's thing, where I personally don't object to anybody. I mean, and here's an example of why I think, again, I've talked to Ernie. Sorry, Bob, I haven't, had a chance to talk to you. I think that thing that the Energy Committee just put in was fairly forceful. But I would never reject something like that and say, okay, well, there's not something, we can talk about it. So I don't object to people putting things in. I think, to me, it would just be if something's kind of crazy, profanity, or I'm not quite sure what I would deem something not acceptable based on just profanity or lewd and loose. I don't know. I can't come up with something. I mean,
Well, if I may, Chris, just because I think you're right on the right track. The one that I would say is it needs to be pertinent to planning commission activities. If you want to put your grandmother's shopping list in the packet, then we can say, no, that doesn't make any sense. It's not pertinent to anything we're doing. So part of what we would ask the submitter to do is say, how does this relate to what we're doing? And if there's even a slightly good argument for how it relates to planning commission activities, okay. Sorry, I interrupted you, but
No, I'm just saying, to me, and again, this is just my opinion. And it's up to all of us, but it's, to me, as far as Stuart's submissions, my feeling was that I'm open-minded about it. If somebody wants to say that the sky is blue and put it in the packet and it's relevant to our discussion, or if somebody else wants to put in the packet the sky is black and it's relevant to our discussion, I'm more than happy to be open to that. I think for the same reason when we experienced the solar siting committee, that we were trying to say very clearly, we really want to welcome everybody's feelings about it. And there are some people who are saying, well, we don't want solar here. And other people are saying, well, we have to have solar here. So it's just a difference of opinion. It's just saying, I don't want to be censoring anybody because you don't agree with their opinion. Even though, if there's a relevance to any one of the topics. So that would be.
So yeah, I think relevance is a better word. I said pertinence, but relevance is the right word for what I mean. Thank you. Stuart?
Well, first, I owe a thank you to both of these two guys who are on the subcommittee for offering me a ride when I couldn't walk after having spent 14 days in the hospital. So you both offered me a ride. You gave me a ride. So thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to disagree with you very strongly. So first, the thank you, and now the criticism. It'd be a dull world if we all thought the same, especially in a liberal democracy. We all have our opinions, and some of the time we're going to agree, and some of the time we're not going to agree. So to vote, the both of you, and you voted to abstain to start with, but to vote not to allow correspondence to be accepted, to me, is untenable, undemocratic, and mistaken. It's just off the chart as far as what should be done. And you both had a chance, and you both did disagree with the things that were submitted for correspondence. And that's perfectly fine. I'm not so sure I agree with what Jack, whatever his last name is, Cushman did. He lost his cookies and stomped out. So yes, it may be an emotional issue for some people as far as whether we have a climate crisis, or whether we don't have a climate crisis. But I thought it was entirely relevant to present the opinions of two Nobel Prize winners. One of them in physics, and the other one, I can't remember what he won his Nobel Prize in, but these guys are not dummies. And I thought they had some legitimate arguments that were worth at least considering or thinking about or talking about. So, and the reason that it's relevant is that one of the prime points in our town plan is I think I've got the quote right. It's climate crisis. It's number one, actually. It's the prism or the lens through which we look at virtually everything in our town plan. So presenting a different opinion was entirely appropriate. And I certainly respect what other people have said and thought, and what's not only in the Vermont statutes, but what also is in the town plan. So, but to me, it's not acceptable to refuse to accept correspondence which is relevant to part of the town plan. So, and I've never heard of correspondence not being accepted, not at the select board and not anywhere else. So,
Yeah, okay. And what I hear you, Stuart, and I want us to be able to talk about this. My hope is that we can do it in a forward-looking way and say can we agree on some guidelines that then, in the heat of the moment, it's easy to it's harder to make a good decision, and it's helpful to have some guidelines that have been talked through. So that's what I'm asking the group to come up with. I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying.
I'd just like to make one more point if I can, Jan, and that
Okay.
is the post that I made. First of all, it was an error. There was a duplication in one of the documents that really, it was corrected at the very end, but most people didn't see the second document, which was submitted by the Nobel Prize winner with the physics Nobel Prize. And I think I should acknowledge that what I posted was overlong and really could have been condensed and, or as you suggested, Jan, or could have simply had a link so that people could have read it. So the form with which things are submitted, I think when you've got a lengthy document, certainly should be more appropriate than the way I submitted them. So mea culpa on that one.
Right. And I think that's part of what I'm asking for in terms of guidelines. Let's do Jeff and then Ernie.
Yeah, so a few thoughts sitting at the select board meeting, which I hope, since there's a planning commission quorum down under the minutes, there is a reference to the select board minutes given the quorum that the planning commission had at the select board meeting. I would like to say to any planning commission member, to the extent you have a concern, my friends do, let's talk about our dirty laundry with the planning commission before you go to the select board. That was not a good night with the select board, in my mind, given what was done with hiring practices and executive session, blah, 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 expression of concerns about, censoring documents. Now, flipping the tables a bit, I completely agree with Stu. If it's pertinent to the topic at hand, it's inconceivable to me that this commission would censor anything that's submitted, to a committee, subcommittee, et cetera. The notion of climate crisis versus sustainability. Climate crisis is not a sustainable term. It's a political term. There's no reality in it. The question of science, for me personally, I trusted, CDC, COVID shots to the point where I was immobilized in my upper body for about 6 months. And my doc said, no, let's do some research, no more. Because the science was barred by mainstream media. Barrington Declaration with myriad, hundreds, thousands of people supporting that paradigm. The mainstream media has been censoring science for reasons I don't know. Like we're now censoring the fact that Jewish children are having their heads cut off. Why are we doing that?
I'm going to have to point of order you on that, Jeff.
I appreciate that, Jan, but I'm just talking about, if we're going to talk about truth and science, I'm sick of the BS, political terms like climate crisis. Let's get back to sustainable needs. Our national debt, and how does that pertain to this community? Affordable housing. Those are real issues that we're lying about. How do you support 43? It's only 33 now, but it's going to be $43 trillion. How do you support that? How do you support affordable housing given the broader context that's going on? So, all this said, I don't care what your religious faith is, whatever your cultish beliefs are. Let's talk about what the real issues are. In this town, if we're going to talk about land use, What are the concerns of the land use committee? What do you want to achieve? What's the subcommittee want to achieve? You actually want to accomplish affordable housing versus subsidized housing, perhaps? I'm not dissing subsidized housing. What is it you want to achieve? Does this, I'm going to quote Stu, do we want a gated community? Do we want to continue in that context? Do we want to continue to pay for double yellow lines down the middle of the road? Do we want to continue to add 50K to each town manager's salary? These all pertain to the land use subcommittee. How do we afford this?
Yeah. Okay. I do, and let's stay, I want to stay focused on this topic. I want Ernie and certainly Ernie and Bob to have their time to speak. And I do want to point it forward in terms of let's agree on some ground rules and guidelines so that we can have a better chance going forward of agreeing. Ernie first.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that to some degree, Stuart's already sort of introduced sort of the partial solution when he said that he should have, instead of put all those documents included in his correspondence. See, my opinion, and it's an opinion, is that almost everything is relevant if it involves the subject. It's relevant. And if it's the person's actual own opinion, it belongs being allowed in. What I have where I sort of draw the line is when it's somebody else's opinion that they're simply saying, this is proof. Now, what Stuart said is he thinks he maybe should have included links to that stuff instead. If Stuart had said, this is what I think, and even if what he said was something I completely disagree with, it's his opinion, and he's welcome to include that as his correspondence. Is it clear? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if he included links, that would have separated other people's opinions who are not on the board, who, in the case of what Stuart said, I looked at the stuff and I just saw it as a lot of disinformation. I didn't see it as Stuart's opinion. I sort of kept on looking at it as almost, and I'm not saying this is the case, but if I'd seen it especially if I didn't know Stuart, if I'd seen it in another forum, I might have thought that this was sort of someone's been pushed into saying something that's not true. Somebody just claiming they're a scientist is easy. At one point you didn't need degrees even to call yourself a scientist. People just looked at what you did. But the point is that just because someone claims they're a scientist doesn't mean every word that comes out of their mouth, no matter what they write about, is true. Someone who is not a climate scientist, I don't know if I would, pit their opinion against a physicist's. I think it's apples to oranges. And the physicist knows about a lot about certain subjects, but that may not qualify them to understand all the details of something as complex as climate science, which is still not completely understood, but we just know that experientially things are happening to the planet and they are in lockstep with other things that the reason they call it anthropogenic or anthropogenic, I keep on forgetting which is proper pronunciation, but caused by humans is because the rise in the problems very clearly corresponds to the rise in the number of people, the rise in the use of materials, rise of resource, all of that stuff. So it's not a far-fetched conclusion, and no science is perfect. Talking about, you hear people about vaccines, and I'm only using this as an example of how science can be not dealt with properly. For most people, the vaccines work. Some people, they don't. I mean, it's quite clear. I mean, you start getting into more complicated diseases and stuff like cancer, and you see doctors trying all kinds of different ways. Something is supposed to work, it doesn't work, then they move it out. You know, the science is there. They're all working with science. There's science is not really black and white, but it does try to be correct. And there are things that are not correct. You know, there's some physicists could say, well, I actually have come to the conclusion that I don't know how we could do this, but could possibly say, I think that the sun revolves around the earth. I mean, I've done my calculations, and that's what I see. That's not the truth. It simply isn't. But just because somebody says I've got the credentials doesn't mean it's correct. Like I said, I think Stuart started us. I think that the best way is to encourage people, if they have something, especially if it's that big, by the way, send links and let people, and separate your opinion from somebody else's opinion. You can learn from other people. That's absolutely necessary. You look at all these people and you make up your own mind. Stuart comes to the committee and says, this is what I think. I think we're making, whatever ultimate decision he wanted us to be convinced of. That's good, because maybe there's a grain of truth in it, but giving me several hundred pages of other people's opinions. And when I can see that these aren't scientists, and one or two, is supposed to justify 1,609 people's signatures. It would have been better, and the issue probably would have not come up if Stuart had done what he now thinks is the better idea. And I agree with him, it's the better idea.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to, just a second, Bob is next, but I don't want to, I want to stay focused on the process question of correspondence and subcommittee activity. I understand, and this is useful as examples for what we're talking about. And the one that you brought up, Ernie, that's good to keep in mind. We have relevance, we have length of submittals, and then the point that you made, which is knowing the source and knowing kind of the whose opinion it is question is valid. It's obviously not necessary that it's someone on the commission's opinion, clearly, because the whole point to correspondence is to let people from outside put their opinions in. But it is, I think, very useful to know who it is that's putting this in front of you. Say, okay, this is the opinion of so and so on this issue that's relevant to the Planning Commission's work. Bob is next.
Yeah, I guess I just say, I'm not sure what discussions have been going on related to this, but it sounds like some people thought we were trying to censor what was on there. That's not the case. It's in the packet. There was no discussion of removing it from the packet or finding pictures of Trotsky to erase or anything like that. It's part of the public record. I think we had, it came up whether to accept it or not. And I'm not sure if I got it right in the minutes that I think Robert Deere had said that that's a vote that occurs in the select board, whether accepting or not accepting correspondence. Came up the first time, I wasn't exactly clear what we were voting on. I abstained. We re-voted because then there was I retracted and voted not to, because there was a big argument then about what that meant, having a split decision. I voted not to accept because I didn't find it acceptable, not being, there was no reference to what, there were articles from the Epoch Times, there was a petition, and there was the third article that I'm not sure where it came from, but it came up multiple times. Stuart, when he brought it up, said he did not agree. He said this previous week also, he wasn't saying he agreed or disagreed. It was just another point of view. I think I was trying to make the argument that there's also the point of view that the earth is flat. There's lots of information about that. We don't need to include that in our packet. A lot of the content of that was unsubstantiated claims. and the ones that were most substantiated of the couple scientists that were in there, one of them was relevant to the half-life of carbon cycling through the atmosphere, that he was disagreeing with unsubstantiated claims that people were saying it stayed in there for thousands of years. He had certain calculations. That was his point in the one article. I don't know how he made the leap then that there wasn't climate change going on, but that was the focus of his article, the first one in there. The article at the end, I think, focused on the reflectivity. He was an expert in cloud formation that focused on the reflectivity of clouds, and that the modeling was inappropriate because we did not have a variable reflectivity for incoming solar radiation to match the variability of clouds in the number of models. That he was arguing that models should be more advanced and include cloud formation, which that was the content. I did read through the articles, and then he made a jump. And then
guys, I do not want to adjudicate climate science here. I understand that and we can go back and forth, but I have something
I
very
guess
big.
my point is that this is what we were filling the conversation of the land use with, this going, and it wasn't that anyone agreed or disagreed with it. It was just another opinion or another point of view. We were having trouble getting to the discussion of the town plan and anything related to the zoning regulations, subdivision within them, because that was kind of taking up all the oxygen in the room for a number of meetings. So I guess that was the
Yeah, and that is really my question. I'll get to you in a second, Stu, but that's really my question to the group, and kind of the creative question to the group is, how do we help ourselves do our job by saying, okay, people, there is this enormous amount of context that can be talked about, and then there is the planning commission is trying to do this, and we need some of it, but we will have no time to do anything if that's what we're talking about. So how do we parse that out and stick to our job? That's really what I'm asking for. Yes.
Who's next?
Stu is next. I'm sorry, and then you can go.
I think you're misunderstanding the point I've tried to make. I'm not arguing climate science here. You want to talk about the validity of what was submitted. And we did spend 45 minutes doing that, not because I spent 45 minutes doing it. You and others spent that amount of time talking about the validity of whether we have a climate emergency or a climate crisis. All I did was submit some documents. And whether they're my opinion or somebody else's opinion, you're in a position to make a judgment about whether they're valid or whether they're worth considering or whatever. But the two of you here are wanting to argue whether the things that were submitted and climate science, whether they were valid or not. And that's not what I'm saying. I didn't take a position on whether they were valid or not valid. I just wanted them to be in the record and to be considered and to be accepted as correspondence, which is what, in my opinion, they should have been. Just because you disagreed with what those people were saying in those documents was not a reason to not accept them as correspondence. I submitted them because I thought that they were interesting, and I thought that they might be making a point that's worth considering. Obviously, you didn't like and don't like what was in those documents, but that's not my point. My point is that they should be accepted as correspondence. End of story.
Yeah.
Lisa Close was next.
Yep, I understand. And then I think I saw Vince's hand come up from the side.
And then I'd like to go after Bob.
And I don't, Chris, did you want to say something?
I did, but let Lisa go.
Okay, Lisa.
Thanks, Chris. So we have work to do. We have a lot of work to do. And I was distressed by the amount of time devoted to this topic. I actually left off a piece for the land use subcommittee for the planning commission on the 28th, but for some reason it didn't get picked up. So I brought a copy. I'm not going to read all of it, but I did. I think the first two paragraphs that I wrote kind of speak to this discussion. Recent planning commission debate centering on what to name or not current changes in climate serves little purpose. We are entrenched in our camps and can point to evidence in support of our point of view from any of a zillion sources within or outside of web world. This information is unlikely to sway any of us from our tightly held viewpoints. While we dither, our expanding human impact on nature continues to reduce wild places that once supported a diversity of creatures, insects, amphibians, birds, while diminishing quality of life for humans too. We should instead focus on limiting human development and its off-site impacts on nature and each other. There are in fact others, many of them non-human, who are seeking homes, futures, health, and life, who require space and healthy, diverse habitat in which to survive, just like humans. An opinion regarding climate change or crisis or emergency isn't required to see that human development of land invariably leads to further development and off-site impacts that alter livability of a place for humans, but impacts non-human communities even more dramatically. Fewer wild places, green spaces, open meadows, the more subtle sounds of nature overwhelmed by sounds of expanding human intrusion into areas once quiet and diverse with many types of living things. Dark nights give way to increasing lumens that blot out stars and force creatures into ever smaller, more compromised corners of the landscape or extinguish them entirely. Nature's wonderful diversity, upon which all humans depend, is reduced to a homogeneous drone of noise, light, cement, and asphalt. In the long run, nature will survive without us. We cannot survive without nature. Technology will never build us an ecosystem of the diversity and beauty nature has developed over millennia. Yet we do remarkably little to protect that which gives us life as we push for progress, in parentheses, only in terms defined by that which pertains to humans. I'll stop there. I'll submit this if I can to Vince. Is that
Yeah,
what
just to, no, sorry, I'm sorry, just to be clear that I saw that as it went into Pam, Pam sent it out, it was addressed to the land use subcommittee, so the proposal was it would be in the packet for the next land use subcommittee meeting. That's why it wasn't in this packet, because you had addressed it to that subcommittee. So that I'm sorry if you thought it was lost, but it was clearly accepted and had a place to go.
As a point of order, can Elisa give it to Vince to incorporate it back tonight?
Yeah, and we can note that was done, and then it's also in the hopper for the next packet for the land use. Chris?
So, Jan, I think you used the right word at the right moment. And you said, I don't think we should be in the business of adjudicating this. And that's such a good way of saying it. People have opinions, and Ernie, I'm going to kind of address what you just said, where all I heard was scientists. And I just asking you a question. I don't mean to set you up with this, but if a religious organization, somebody from town, a religion came in and wrote you a document saying, you know, our church believes this, and we don't need to listen to science, but, you know, the frogs are dying. You know, you can't dismiss them because it's a religious organization and they're not scientists. So I think to Jan's point that we're not here to adjudicate that we just accept correspondence. And Lisa, I hope you put your name on it. You know, just have people.
I did. Yes, thank you, Chris.
Yes, so have people author what they have. And again, getting back to the logistics of correspondence, I like seeing this kind of stuff. I'm not going to discount somebody just because there wasn't a scientist behind it. I'm willing to listen to anybody. But again, we don't want to overwhelm the packet with stuff that isn't on the subject, the relevance. So again, in my opinion, Jan, you said it right. We're not here to be adjudicating whether, anything somebody submits is based on scientific evidence or religious evidence or whatever. If it has relevance to the subject at hand, I don't see having a problem with accepting it, and definitely not getting a debate over correspondence, whether your correspondence was correct or not. And I'm going to give you one really quick example. When we were having an argument in town about the yellow blinking lights, dozens of people wrote letters to the select board saying, we want the yellow lights. And they gave all kinds of lists of reasons. And then dozens of other people said, we don't want the yellow blinking lights because they gave their all reasons. It's not up to the select board to suddenly say, well, we don't like these people's opinions because they have no basis for it. You accept it, and it becomes part of public correspondence. And that's it. It's kind of like, I get to filter through all the different reasons why, why do you want those stupid blinking lights? Oh, I see why. So it just gives you some back and forth, but that's, it's just if people at least author it. And I like Stuart's idea of the links. If it's a really long document, just link it or something.
So Ken, I need to move us on because we have a select board meeting tomorrow that we're on the agenda for. And so I want to try and encapsulate this. Jeff?
Bob raised his hand and I raised my hand.
Okay, Bob?
I'll just make it quick. Yeah. Stuart was saying end of story, but we in a previous meeting, there was something that it was clear entered for additional reading material and all that. I think there was some public comment on it, but we didn't spend much time on it as an alternative viewpoint, which was not agreed or disagreed with, just something to consider. Then additional material came and was entered in like multiple articles from more questionable sources. It's part of public record. We did not say to remove it from public record, but it was brought up for discussion and consideration. We tried to have our discussion and consideration. It took up a lot of, we had the forum to have consider it. And that's, I guess the objection that there wasn't much of any defense or talk about it, but we'd rather just leave it. You're welcome to submit whatever, to the packet and all that. But if we're going to consider it to change town plan and whatever, and town plan and zoning regulations based on something that comes, we should discuss it. But if we're not willing to discuss it or take opinions on it, it seems like maybe we should try to figure out how to move on.
Okay, so help me out here, people. I want to get us out of here by 8:30, and we have a select board meeting tomorrow to prepare for. So please keep it brief, and then we'll try and wrap this topic up. It's Jeff and then Ernie.
Yeah, so I'd like to get back to sustainable principles, which to me boil down to, if you use it, how you replace it. If you're taxed, how do you get repaid? Trying to be polite. And with respect to whatever is submitted for correspondence, whatever folks submit should be accepted. I agree with your point about adjudication, and I have never shared single communication between Ernie and me in private, but on listserv recently, he talked about someone who made a comment about the people addressing the select board's decision on the town manager as the typical naysayers, and I'm trying to be polite. I don't remember what word Ernie used, whether it was egotistical or arrogant.
You were right.
So whether I agree or disagree, so when Ernie says disinformation, when Ernie and Bob talk about science, when Stu talks about science, who do they think they are? Your arrogance and egotistical mindset is appalling to me. So just have an open mind, regardless of your faith, as Chris pointed out. Let's have a conversation. Moving forward, the whole notion of signatures and justification and not hogwash, I'm going to refer everybody to the Barrington Declaration for real science, real doctors, real issues, which our nation has, our mainstream media and our current administration has essentially blacked out. So let's no censorship. Let's not use terms like the earth is flat. Let's not have select board members show up and say, Jeff Goodrich, you're a racist and it's sexist. Let's not do that. Let's bring an end to the hate speech. Let's see if we can go forward, positively engaging one another.
All right,
Last comment.
Ernie has it, and then I'd like to wrap it up with a proposal. Go
Okay,
ahead.
what I want to do is sort of wrap it up and then you can.
Okay, give it a shot.
Yeah, I was thinking, basically, we just sort of, the formulation could be basically, first of all, I'll just put it in points and then you can sort of like maybe make it flow better. But the points is, first of all, it has to be, you're welcome, your opinion is very welcome, period. It doesn't matter what the opinion is. As Chris said, we're not here to judge. And that's valid. Okay, so make sure it's your opinion. Don't bring something that you just think is interesting. That you can do that, privately. I think that, especially if you don't actually agree with it yourself. I mean, if you agree with it, then, say, this is my opinion and go, and here are my sources, go to them. That way we are, and it doesn't have to be just board members either. I mean, anyone, public, anyone that wants to correspond with us. It's correspondence between them and us, not correspondence between some other agency or something like that. It's the people who are, I guess that's the real thing that bothers me. It's going to be correspondence between the person who's sending it to us, whether they're in the committee or outside the committee. And if they want to provide evidence and stuff like that, especially such that can be really voluminous, lead us to the links, tell us how they got it, tell us the names, the documents, whatever you want to do. That's all totally valid. And it doesn't really matter what the opinion is. As I said, we're not here to judge that the opinion itself is wrong. And that way, I think we can avoid brouhahas like this from here on out, and people get to say what they want to say and then lead us to their evidence. And then we can make up our minds on our own, on their evidence. And then when we go back to the subject, we will have learned what their evidence provided us or discarded it, whatever we judge about that evidence. Then we're not judging opinions either on top of it all. We do have to, I mean, as people, standing in for other people, we do have to make judgments at some point, but it doesn't have to be on people's opinions. I'm not sure if I'm being completely clear here, but that's what I'm trying to sort of help make a formulation here and we can make it clear. This is what we accept. And if that's what it is, we don't even have to vote on it. If we don't, it's just accepted. Yeah, we can do it that way if we wanted to. And then the only time something would be rejected is if it wasn't a person's own opinion, or it wasn't, or they might have been, and then we don't have to also worry about where the people get their opinions. It doesn't matter to us whether we agree with it, the source or anything.
Okay, let me paraphrase, and then Stu, you can go and we'll take it. So I think any opinion or information is welcome. We're not censoring anything coming in. I think the point about correspondence is the same thing as the relevant statement. It's being put in the planning commission's mailbox. It's not being put in my personal mailbox or anything. So it is correspondence to the planning commission with the assumption that it is somehow relevant to something the planning commission is doing. So I think that's a perfectly legitimate statement. And then please use links to keep the length in to a reasonable level. And that those three things by themselves, I think, are sufficient to have this not take up too much of our time. Stu?
I think that's a good paraphrase. That's what I said, a lot shorter.
Stu?
So I think that if the information is relevant, regardless of whether it's my opinion or the man in the moon's opinion or whoever's opinion it is, if it's relevant to what we're doing, and these documents that were submitted were entirely relevant, given what the town plan says, they should have been accepted, regardless of whether you agreed with them or disagreed with them. And you spent 45 minutes disagreeing with them, along with Jack Cushman and Bob and others who were there. There are 7 people there. So I would make a motion to accept all correspondence that's relevant. With the addition that any lengthy correspondence be formed with links. So I don't think that the the qualification is whether it's my opinion or your opinion or anybody else's opinion.
Yeah, so Stuart, just to be clear, my paraphrase did not include whose opinion it was. The 3 items I had were.
No, I was just
Any
amplifying.
opinion is, but so I take your motion, and I would just ask that we combine, if you would combine it with the identification of the source and the submitter, clear identification of who put it in, that if it's.
Absolutely.
Yep,
That was
relevant, ask for reasonable length with the use of links, and if it's relevant, then we accept it.
Second.
All right, we got a second. Any further discussion? Please not. But I'll accept it.
Last comment, it was perfectly clear. It was perfectly clear who submitted.
It wasn't, it was just in the packet without your name on it.
So that's
Well,
fine.
we got-
I work with,
When we got there,
Call the question.
yeah, we'll call the question.
I made
Call the
it
question.
Call the question. All right, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Do you mind
All right.
rephrasing the question?
Thank
or
you.
repeating the question?
Jeff,
That is a,
Jan, did we include everything that you were saying in your 4 points?
yeah, I think I had, okay, for it's any information and opinion is welcome. That is into our correspondence that is relevant to PC business. The source needs to be identified clearly, and we ask that links be used to keep the length reasonable.
I got it. Yep.
Okay, all right.
Can I
Thank
just
you.
make,
Yes,
Sorry.
Chris.
so I just looked back at the select board minutes, just to sort of avoid this whole accepting and not accepting correspondence in either, in the larger PC, it makes sense. But in our small groups, subcommittees, the select board took on this thing called consent agenda. And basically what they did is they put correspondence in consent. And it was just, it wasn't, they didn't even bother whether they accepted or not accepted correspondence. They just said, we're good. And the correspondence was only brought up in relation to, and then again, back to Stuart's point is, if the correspondence that comes in, it's kind of like accept it and then say, okay, in our next meeting, let's address this topic, right?
Point of
You
order.
don't bring it
Yeah.
up.
Sorry, Jeff, point of order.
If we're gonna talk about a consent agenda, let's talk about it at our next meeting. I may or may not agree with Chris, but that's not on our agenda.
Yeah, and I think let's take the progress we've made in terms of process around correspondence, and that motion, and stick with that for the night. Thank you. I do think that's important progress, and we can build on it with process. We can have a little process section each meeting, and if we make a chunk of progress on process, I'd be very happy. But what we need to talk about, and we're still on the same agenda item, it's the third piece. I'm not even gonna, if we have time for subcommittees, we'll talk subcommittees in the next thing. But the key point is that we are on the agenda for the select board meeting tomorrow. Now, this came up in a combination of the staff topic, the memo that I had submitted based on our conversations previously. I submitted a memo at the previous select board meeting that was put into correspondence, and we had a little back and forth on it, which then around staff and PC relationship to select board. Marcia, and I talked with her and Brendan again later, and that got to, okay, put an agenda item on, which is more general to planning commission and select board interaction. And because Marcia has a general topic where she wants to start talking about how the select board deals with talks and in liaisons with various committees. So the planning commission is on the agenda for that. So this is relative to our staff topic and the planning commission topic, but a starting point to a select board conversation. It's number 7 on the agenda of a select board meeting tomorrow. It's got some pithy stuff ahead of us. So it is perfectly possible it's going to happen 10 o'clock at night. But I would like us to have a little bit of time here to discuss it as a group before tomorrow. I think, Ernie, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to make an observation about the meetings that we have in this planning commission. Instead of what, I'll just leave it, that instead of what we used to have, we had just went through a relatively, possibly really divisive or acrimonious kind of discussion. And instead, everyone was laughing at the end of it. I think that that's something that should be just noticed among us, if nothing else.
We can agree to disagree.
Right. But we can laugh about it too.
Yeah. Well,
And yeah, thank you, Ernie. That is definitely true, and it should be noted.
it wasn't acrimonious.
No, it could have been.
Good. We can do better than that if we're shooting for acrimonious. Come on.
It didn't
Okay,
become
Jeff,
acrimonious.
let's open it up on the
Yeah.
select. board
Yeah,
side.
so
Thank you, Ernie.
I'm going to confess openly, like I used to do with Richard Stucker, that I love Ernie. I occasionally agree with him, but I nonetheless love him completely. So relative to the whole staff question, select board, I'm going to try to, I'm struggling with apoplexy in the context that in theory, the zoning administrator, and yes, I'm choosing that term on purpose, has a primary role to assist the DRB with its needs. And to me, a secondary role to assist the planning commission with its needs. And I understand there's a town manager, role of government where maybe the CA opens mail and, I don't know what, it helps the DPW with stuff. And I'm being terribly facetious. Chris, forgive me at this moment. But the bottom line is the ZA's job description is absolutely critical with respect to what our real needs are, not at the whim of a town manager, which we've seen for years, right? For some years. So to me, the planning commission needs to say, look, we're adamant about what the VSA say. We're adamant about being engaged in the selection and hiring process. We're also adamant about truthfully acknowledging that the selection process in times past hasn't included people with any knowledge about this paradigm. We need to be, so what I heard a former, what do you call it, ambassador from Israel talk about, if we don't identify the problem, we're not going to solve it. So I'm not trying to change the subject again, but the problem is that we're not engaging folks that have any understanding of what the need is. So how can we engage someone that has knowledge about, the need? So I would like to see this commission take a very strong and active role in the context of hiring someone and then going forward, managing that person in the context of where this commission used to be 6-7 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other thoughts?
One of those places where you and I agree.
Well, I'm just out of curiosity, is on to Jeff's point. Is there anything, where are we on a new ZA? Has there been
Well, I think that
job posting?
I mean, that is the driving topic relative to this. It's the first topic relative to this conversation with the select board. That's how we got here, and that's how we got to the front of the line, so to speak, for the conversation. And it has to do with the current job description that's posted is for a relatively senior person. And there are a couple of candidates that had reapplied. They'd come on the map and then they dropped off and then they came back, both of whom are relatively senior, and they're applying to the planning director job description that's up there now. And Brennan specifically is concerned that, he can't entertain talking to them in good faith, in the sense that if the planning commission is saying we want a ZA and we want a very different staff member and relationship, then those people wouldn't be good candidates. So before we reinvigorate advertising and reinvigorate a hiring process, we need to be talking about the same individual in a job description, and we're not there yet. So that's why this is the topic on the table. And I would like to put something else on the table relative. I see you, just a second. I think that's Ernie's sleeve, but we can have little flags. My question to the group, and we had the conversation about a working planning commission, and the planning commission is the operating planning department, so to speak, in a small municipality like Norwich. We had that conversation, and I agreed with it, and we went with a consensual proposal to the select board. My question to this group, though, is I'm trying to gauge the reality of hours in the week that people are able to put into this, because the way I'm seeing it, I would love to have capable staff at our disposal. And the more capable, the better, as long as they're at our disposal. That's really the key point. But in terms of, if we just went around the room, and I don't propose doing this, but do it in your head, how many hours a week do each of us think we can spend on planning commission activities? And then how much work do we have to get done? And how does that relate to what we want staff to do? And then how does that relate to the job description for staff and the capability of staff? And so I'm caught in this conundrum, sort of, to say, I'd really like a pretty capable person, as long as we're able to direct them and get them working on planning commission activities, because there are only so many hours in a day, and we got all these other things we're doing. So I think I saw Ernie's arm, Jeff, first, and then we'll go.
Yeah, I think we have to stand firm with saying we want a zoning administrator, not a planning director. First of all, planning director, I think I've gone through this before, but planning director is not suitable for a town this size. Okay. Second of all, the planning commission is the party that nominates whoever gets hired, not the town manager. Now, we keep on having town managers that like to disregard the rules they don't like in this town. Half the time they are insubordinate to the select board.
Point of order.
Well, the point is that the town manager is going to demand that he gets to pick the zoning administrator, because he wants to be able to control that as if he's just regular staff. The the zoning administrator is not ordinary staff. It's not like the secretaries or any of the things that they've made up to fill, for Miranda and so on. It's a formalized thing that's recognized in statute and says, we pick, and we nominate, same thing. And we are the ones responsible for the regulations, not the zoning administrator, regardless of who writes them, we're responsible for them. And now the other thing is that the regulations need rate fixing, but not every single regulation needs that. And what the first thing we do is, just like any legislative body, you go through and find the ones that need fixing first, and you fix those. And then you go, and then as things are put into practice, you start finding out where there's shortcomings, what needs to be fixed later, and so on and so forth, where you may have, overstepped or had unintended consequences or whatever, and you go back and renovate it again. And you don't just, I've never understood this logic in this town uses, but maybe others do too, where you just spew out this big body of law every few years. And you throw everything else that you had beforehand out, or maybe not everything, but the point is that that's not how you really do laws, and it's not very efficient, and it's not very effective. And it then makes it so that it becomes a problem for us to actually do it, us this 7-person body, and it makes it difficult to take in. So, for instance, instead of just throwing everything out, we focus on, we look through and see what's problematic now, and we start with with the development review boards. What's your biggest problems now? And we address those first, and we make sure, because they're like the president. They're kind of they act like a court, but they're kind of more executive in a lot of ways. But it doesn't really matter what in both the case of court and in the case of executives. That's where you find where you need to change your laws. In the case of, I don't know how familiar you are with law, but when you're in the case of courts with their case law, though they're making up laws because the statutes themselves don't cover those issues. And in the case of the executive, they're saying, you gave me this law and I can't do anything with it, or I can't do what you want with it. So, and the ZA is kind of the executive for us also, more than, the town manager is not the executive for this group. The ZA is. He's the one who will be granting permits. Hopefully he won't be granting them for, lots that are illegal or something like that and stuff like that. But he has to know the law that as we write them and administer those laws. That's what his job is. Except for when the development review board has to review things, which is, set down in the law, as part of the routine, which, I can only draw the comparison between courts and, regular, state legislature versus the town government. It's not the strictest one-to-one relationship.
Mhm.
But I think, do you understand is it clear what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. I think the point is, part of what you're saying, I believe, is we take what we have for resources and we prioritize what we're trying to do. And we say, oh, okay, there's the DRBs, the needs, what are the needs? And we don't need to say, oh my God, we got to rewrite all 3 of our regs within the next year and a half, and therefore we need an army of staff.
Right.
So, yeah. Okay. Jeff?
And but I want to say also, I want to just make sure, we also have statutory duties and rights that cannot be overrun by the select board or the town manager, for instance, and that is, for instance, nominating who we want and what we want them to do. That's not anyone else's priority, prerogative. That's ours.
Yeah, well, let me to say something which I think is useful for this conversation and gets right at that. And then Jeff, you can go. When I was talking about this with Marcia, and she was trying to frame the agenda item for tomorrow or for this conversation, she went to the statute. She said, okay, 4325, which lists the powers and responsibilities of the planning commission. And she asked the question. She said, if this planning commission went down that list, which items would be the most important, which would we want to focus on? And so the first 2 or 3 are the do the town plan, prepare and give to the legislative body the town plan, the bylaws, subdivision regs, and so on. Number 5 or 6 is capital planning. Number 7 is building codes. So there are several things that we have done, we haven't talked about as much, but part of her question to put on the table was, what does this PC want to focus on out of that menu list of statutory roles? Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate Ernie's reference to the law, the VSAs. But there's a lot, in my opinion, that's lacking, but it's kind of simple. So with respect to the VSAs and the Planning Commission's needs, that does not address what the DRB does. It doesn't address the statutory, role that a zoning administrator may play. So to me, that's inappropriately parsing the paradigm. For me, what has been advertised for this role by town managers for some years has nothing to do, or largely nothing to do, with what our real need is. So to be clear, the role of a zoning administrator, and I've only worked in, 250, 300 towns regionally, something like that, is, look, my job as a zoning administrator is to make a decision about zoning. And when I make that decision, there's an appeal process. Depends on the local paradigm, but for us, it's the DRB. My job as a zoning administrator in the context of our community is when an applicant comes in, I understand the rules this way, this is what your submission requirements need to be. And with all due respect to the DRB, we've got lay board members that sometimes know their elbows from their freckles. And I mean, sometimes they don't know anything about land use regulations, and I'm trying to be polite. So the zoning administrator's role is to say, this is what the rules say. Coming back to what Ernie said, as a lay board member, how do you make a decision about a project when you know jack about what our rules say? That was my less polite way of framing that. So that's the zoning administrator's role with respect to the DRB. Now, we know Norwich is a boom town with 300-400 applications a year, and I'm being facetious, not really. But there is a role for the zoning administrator when folks claim fences are too close to the road all over town. And anyway, the next step would be, okay, what do the rules say? How do we work on those rules? So let's say a zoning administrator only spends 10 hours on the DRB projects. What do you do with the other 30 hours? And if the zoning administrator has 20 hours, let's say hypothetically, to work on whatever it is we need, great. Then the zoning administrator can say, you know what, town manager, now I can open your mail. I can drive you to and fro.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to be flippant saying this, but the priorities need to be, what are the planning and zoning requirements for the town?
Right.
How do we make that our focus? And that ought to be on the select board's agenda.
Right. So I think that's clear. And I think we're still, and please correct me if this isn't the case, but I think we still have consensus that we're talking about an employee for planning and zoning. That's what they get up in the morning to come and do. And given that the DRB and the Planning Commission are the planning and zoning bodies in the town, that's who they look to for direction. The interesting point that I got out of what you said, Jeff, relative to the ZA's authority and role in the permitting, is that they're making judgment calls. It's a pretty significant step, because if you say, oh gosh, the ZA is a less capable position who is pushing papers for the DRB, that's a different statement than saying, no, this person really understands the regs and is making the judgment calls that preferably most of the time aren't appealed because they had perfectly good judgment. And so that to me speaks to a more capable person than just than an administrator of permits and send me this Mylar by Tuesday kind of thing.
Yeah, and if I may respond to that, though, so police chief and the zoning administrator have quasi judicial roles like the DRB that the town manager may not influence. That doesn't mean that our town managers haven't tried to influence that.
Mm-hmm.
That said, if we get I say to Peter Gregory at Two Rivers, I'll take any one of your staff to be a ZA here. I'll take any other RPC staff member to be a ZA. It doesn't take a lot of experience. It takes someone committed to understanding the rules. And I'm going to say this, whether I offend or not. Phil Deckard had no experience in this realm. He dove in and he did a decent job over the years trying to learn the rules. And as a point of order, I'm going to say, I'm just saying the job is to learn the rules and make a decision about the rules, whether you're right or wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, just let me go. I'm gonna Chris and then Ernie, and then I just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak because I want us to chime in before we talk to the select board if anybody stays up that late. Chris?
No, I'm just gonna go bounce off of what Jeff just said. That I hope that it's in the job description that, this is obviously somebody who's as an administrator, but also can understand, the cleaning up. I know it's our job and their job together, cleaning up language so that when they go and help with the DRB, it's not so much, if the language gets cleared up, there's less judgment call by people. And I think that's what the DRB has been arguing, is that there a lot of the, the shalls and the must and PUDs only have the word encourage. So to me, it's the zoning administrator really needs to also, like us, take a fine-tooth comb and start really focusing in on tightening up the language of, and I hope that's part of the ZA job description.
Well, I think it's interestingly in the statutes where it says the ZA, basically follows the letter of the laws. That it's stated there in almost an impossible level of precision that they will solely follow the regulations as presented or something like that.
I'm not saying quite what I'm saying is I've been at this almost 40 years. 10 years in, I was ready for this job.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need a 20, 30, 40-year person. We need someone who's got a few years under their belt, who understand the rules and the law.
Okay.
And if you remember, actually, before Phil Deckard, that is exactly what we had at a time when this town was growing at its greatest rate. With Charlie Welch.
Yeah, I work with
a friend of mine, by the way. And the point is that, the having been on the DRB for 15 years, literally since its inception, I got a really good handle on what was wrong with our regulations. And a lot of the times they had conflicts built into them. There was ambiguity. There was all kinds of, everything Chris just said about the clarity of the language is absolutely correct. She and I talked about this a lot, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that the clarity of our regulations is not great. And it wasn't getting, and when we were starting the rewrite most recently, I pointed out to them, first of all, I've been on Ledge Council for a bit, and I learned how to write legislation. And there are now ways of writing legislation that are sort of new and improved ways of writing legislation. For instance, using the word must rather than shall, and a few other things like that. And they make a difference. And Rod was like really hostile to using these changes. And I mean, I was spending a lot of my time personally just going through and changing the ambiguities and pointing out where there were ambiguities. And Rod was with all his expertise, he was no more adept at writing the regulations than Charlie or Phil were. Right, and of course, I'm not going to say good things about Phil, so I won't say anything. The point is that the regulations were absolutely were really, really difficult to work with for the DRB. We can do a whole lot better, and it's not going to be because of the zoning administrator. It's going to be because of us lay people who know how to read what we and write. You know, that's the other thing I have to take exception with Jeff about the lay people. Maybe I'm not quite sure. But the point is that those lay people, especially with the large number of them that they have available, you know, they get the idea. It's not that hard to understand the letter of the law. It says what it says, and they shouldn't have to interpret. It's simple. The only times you have to interpret, you should have to interpret, is when situations have changed and made a law no longer viable or made it somewhat wrong. I mean, I'm not going to say any law is completely wrong, but you know what I'm trying to say? It's not, and I agree with Jeff. We do not need a senior person. We need someone who's just got a good head, and probably somebody young is probably more adaptable than somebody who is stuck in their ways. So I think that also might be something of not a qualification, but it won't hurt to look at somebody, you know, like, what's his name right now that we have?
Kyle.
Yes.
Yeah, Kyle.
I don't think we should be
Oh.
talking about age.
Why?
Can we,
It's that we're an
Yeah,
EEO employer. Anybody who applies.
Right, I agree with that, and we need to be clear about that. I think that, we want somebody who is, you know, able to learn new things and does not have to know everything about our regs to walk in the door and be useful. Not experienced, the experience on these specific, certainly our specific stuff is less important. I want to ask Bob and Vince if they have anything to put in here, because I'm afraid we're going to turn into pumpkin soup.
I think Jeff hit the nail on the head. Someone who's focused on the, you know, understanding and ready to dive into that.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, is that
It doesn't have to be senior person.
right? Was Stuart raising his hand next to you?
Were you first? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
So I just want to urge that we be very cautious in who we recommend, and that we want to find somebody who is willing to learn and is not quite so arrogant as some of the people who may have occupied that particular post.
Point of order, arrogance is not something we want. How about that?
It's not what we want.
There we go.
Because if we don't, and we also have to find somebody who's willing to administer the regulations as they exist. And I'll cite just one small example and then I'll stop. You know, when there's a subdivision, you can't have a subdivision which has one regular sized lot and one undersized lot. That doesn't work. It took many years of litigation to convince the town, and many thousands of dollars to convince the town that that was appropriate and necessary. And it was simply the
Point of order, that was agree or disagree. That's a past decision.
it is a past decision, but it is relevant to what we're talking about.
I like,
So, and I'm going to stop talking in a second and just urge again that we select somebody who is willing to learn, who is not arrogant, and who is willing to interpret the regulations apart from any other considerations.
Right.
Because we've had people who are not willing to interpret the regulations as they are written, knowing what the regulations say. And
Yeah.
it's been very costly to the town.
So I think the willing to learn piece is important, and I think we should keep that in mind. I would wrap around, because I think Ernie's point was well taken relative to the size of the job at hand, so to speak, or we don't have to rewrite everything immediately. And I'm combining that with what I said before about just how many hours each of us is able to put into this, and what does that give us with staff for bandwidth? And to a certain degree, that question is always going to be on the table, and we're going to use it to adjust our our output. We're going to say, all right, it's going to take 6 months to do this, or 4 months, or whatever, and we're going to prioritize and deal with that. So I think this, to the staff point of view, it's, we want somebody who is sees themselves as a planning and zoning asset person. That's their driving force. That's why they're here, and is willing to learn, does not have to know everything coming through the door. We'd almost prefer they didn't. Certainly they didn't think they knew everything before they came through the door. And then that we, as the planning commission, are right at the forefront of both finding that person and directing them on a day-to-day basis, doing the work. Jeff?
Yeah, I largely agree with what Stu said. Point of order exempted, but to me, that person also needs to be an advocate. And I'm going to say it simply: an advocate for the applicant, an advocate for the rules, an advocate for the town.
Absolutely.
This is not about us versus them. So, in my 40 years or so and more than 15,000 projects, the us versus them thing needs to be gone. The notion that lay board members, so if I come to the Norwich DRB, I'm going to try and explain what a boundary line is. I'm going to try and explain what a contour line is. I'm likely going to argue with DRB members about what drainage is. That's how uninformed our lay board members are. And I'm trying to be polite. I respect and love them dearly, and I'm hoping that they can transcend. How come I can't see this 24 by 36 inch plan on my little iPhone? I have horrific experiences in this town when our town rules are among the least ambiguous that I've encountered in more than 250 towns. The issue of why you don't say shall and must is because when you talk about a planned residential development that weighs the benefits of wetlands, open space, and so forth, density, we've got really good regulations about how you plan a planned residential development that might have 9 lots, 9 units, if you will, versus 3 conventional units. And there's a reason for that. But it's about weighing items in the application that very few members on our DRB, in my experience for nearly 40 years, have any knowledge about what they're discussing. I'm not trying to be demeaning or pejorative about our DRB members. That's not my point. We need a member that's going to help come alongside them, come alongside the applicant, and say, okay, what is it we're trying to achieve based on what the rules are saying?
Yeah. Right. And a full-time person who is then able to put the time in to help part-time lay people do their job. Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm looking at the time. We're at 8:36.
I just got one thing to say.
Okay, go ahead, Ernie.
I got to respectfully disagree with Jeff. The DRB people learn, first of all, the DRB's now been only around 20 years. But the point is that people actually do learn very quickly what lot lines and all the technical jargon means, especially the ones that have been on there a long time. You see the stuff over and over and over again. It's not rocket science. And there's a lot of people. I mean, we had, when I was on it, we had 3 lawyers, one of which was a judge also. And the laws are still relatively simple. It's the ambiguities that Jeff may say there's few and far between, and that just shows how good the planning commissions have been in the past, not the ZAs. It's the planning commissions that wrote the laws in the past. And
Mhm.
that's, we're gonna be writing the planning commission, and the planning commission's gonna be rewriting the laws. And like I said, we may not be doing that much. I mean, if there really aren't that many any problems, we'll fix them. And then there are some things that have to be brought up, up to date that relate to the times. Those changes will occur too, and before anything's done, there's, some research that has to be done by us to come up with the better, new and improved regulations, the ones that need changing, and we leave the rest alone.
Yeah, okay, I think, so what I'm hearing that we're agreeing on, which is the important piece, is an open-minded, willing to learn person who is capable and sees themselves as a planning and zoning employee. That's really that's the nub of what we're really agreeing is important. And that's helpful. And actually the point is, it's not a junior person versus a senior person. It is that willingness to learn, open-minded, capable, and planning and zoning. So that to me is a helpful summary. It certainly helps me make sense of it in my head. And I think that's what we're asking for. And that's, whoever can make it tomorrow and can sit through the first 2 or 3 hours before they get to us, then we can chime in. One thing, just as a process point relative to when we had a quorum of us at the last select board meeting. One thing I saw the listers do, the listers just put out their agenda for 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And their last agenda item was continue our meeting to the 6:30 select board meeting. So they essentially warned their participation in the select board meeting as part of their agenda by just continuing their regular meeting to the next day. So if I had known that trick, I could have done it when I made the agenda for this meeting. I could have said, we're going to continue tomorrow at 6:30, and that would have made our meeting warned if we had a quorum tomorrow. But we can do the come back around and put minutes in if we end up with a quorum. Stu?
Motion to adjourn
Second.
with a suggestion that we have a special meeting to reconstitute the land use subcommittee.
Okay, I've got a motion to adjourn. Do people, let's pause on adjournment for a minute and just say, can we wait until November 7th to talk about the land use subcommittee? Is my question to the group.
So if you're saying this is a matter of discussion, given the motion and second, certainly. So we have to act on the motion in the second, but this is part of the discussion. So
yeah, we're discussing the motion to adjourn, although I'm not sure I'm not sure you're allowed to, but we're gonna for a minute. Do we need to have a meeting before the 7th? Is my question to the group. And if you keep passing notes in class, you're gonna have to stay late.
Ernie and I are trading Hershey's Kisses.
And how about I flip it around and propose that we can wait until the 7th and have land use on the item as an agenda item for that meeting. Because I
go along with that if it's early in the meeting so that we actually get
so
to
that
it.
we get it done. All right, I will take that as and I had the next item on the agenda is solar subcommittee updates. And so that we'll flip it and that'll be first on the agenda for the next one. I would just ask people if you want to, the solar siting committee will be a week from today, and we're going to be talking Ridgeline and scenic input into solar, and we're trying to beat the drums to get some public comments coming in. Ernie, this is discussion on a motion to adjourn.
Well, it's related to the agenda that we've just been talking about.
Okay.
Is the land use subcommission allowed to or forbidden from meeting in the interim.
Do you plan to meet or do you?
Well, we could, I mean, it would be time for another meeting in between then.
I don't feel strongly either way. Does anybody feel strongly that we should tell them not to meet before the 7th?
No, hey, here's the deal. It's the two-person committee. If they want to get together, great.
Okay. I don't feel strongly either way, so I'd say
And any one of us can join, right? Is that, how would that work?
it's gotta be a warned meeting, so you're gonna know. And so you're welcome to chime in. And then if they want to meet, you want to join, and then we will talk on the 7th about adding members and charter and anything else. Okay. I'm gonna call the question to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, folks. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Hey, Chris.
He likes that, Bill.
Anybody tomorrow is welcome. Please come.
There's no accounting for taste.